Hello there friends and welcome. For today's Pathfinder video we have, as requested by one of my channel members, a guide that's all about Metamagic. Mastering the Metamagic feats and items is the key to achieving the ultimate potential with any of your spellcaster characters. No matter their type and role, buffing, debuffing, crowd control, damage, Metamagic will help you with everything, and you'll have a specific feat for each of these purposes. Everything that will be covered here. So without further ado, let us get into our Metamagic guide. First, let us cover how to actually use Metamagic. There's two ways, either through Metamagic RODS that you can find or buy, or most importantly from the actual Metamagic feats you can get during character progression. For this, simply head to your character's spellbook by pressing B or selecting this icon here. Then click on the Metamagic tab on the lower left of the screen. Up here, below Metamagic, you have all of the Metamagic feats your character has access to. In my case, I have Persistent, Bolster, and Heighten. Now first we have to select the spell we want to apply Metamagic to. Let's start with Hideous Laughter. Just click on it once, and it will appear right here at the center. Now you have to click on the Metamagic you want to apply it. If the Metamagic icon is red, like Bolster here, it's because it will not work with the spell you have selected. I'll later cover what each of the Metamagic feats do, but just in case, Bolster can only be applied to damage spells and Hideous Laughter is crowd control. Below the Metamagic icon, you have how many extra levels will be added to the spell. Each Metamagic feat has an associated spell level increase cost. For example, Persistent spell has a +2 level increase, which means that Hideous Laughter, a level 2 spell by default, will now become a level 4 spell, so it can only be slotted on level 4 slots. You'll still retain access to the normal level 2 version. This is just for the actual special Metamagic version of the spell. Now simply click on the Metamagic icon you want to apply. If you go for Persistent, the resulting spell level will become 4, and now you can choose a decoration and an outline color. It's just visual and cosmetic really, just so you can separate your spells, especially the Metamagic versions, from each other. Now don't forget to click Write Spell right here. Now let's check our level 4 spells. And there we go. We now have as a level 4 spell a Persistent version of Hideous Laughter, just like we prepared. Now my character here, a Demon Enchantress, is an Intelligence caster that is a Thessalonian specialist, which means we are also a prepared caster. This is very important because prepared casters like my demon here, or spontaneous casters like Darren and Oracle, have a few differences when it comes to Metamagic. First, as a prepared caster, after applying Metamagic to the spell you want, you actually have to memorize the Metamagic version into one of your slots. For example, let's double-click Hideous Laughter, and there we go, it's now being prepared as a level 9 spell. However, it will only apply after you rest, right? That's why the slot is grayed out, and it says rest to restore spells. Prepared casters have an advantage in that they can cast Metamagic spells as a standard action, so the normal around 3 seconds to cast the spell. Now let's talk about how spontaneous casters do it. It's the same as far as preparing the spell with Metamagic, but spontaneous casters can always cast whatever spell they have, right? They don't need to memorize the spell into a spell slot. So as soon as you prepare the Metamagic spell, they have that extra versatility because they can always use it. For example, let's turn their Arcane's Aura buff into a level 9 spell through Heighten. It immediately appeared into Darren's level 9 spells, and unlike the prepared wizard, he can cast it right now, on demand, without having to rest first. On the other hand, here's the downside. Spontaneous casters have to spend a full round action to cast Metamagic spells. So the Heightened version of Arcane's Aura is full round. The normal level 3 version is just a standard action. What this means is it will take them around 6 seconds of channeling before they can cast their Metamagic spell. Of course, in combat this can be a bit annoying. But there are ways to overcome that, for example, through the Sorcerer's Reflex, Mythic feat for up to level 7 spells, and of course Quicken Metamagic RODS, so they will go from full round into swift action that is instantly cast. Now let's talk about the second and the easiest way of applying Metamagic, through Metamagic RODS. And there's a lot of them in the game for almost all of the Metamagic feats, except Heighten. Using them is very simple. First, hatch your inventory, then double-click on the rod you want, or just drag it to your quick slots here. Now click on the little B icon here to the right corner of your hotbar, which is your usable items tab. All of our Metamagic rods will be here. You can only use one Metamagic rod per spell cast. For that, first click on it, and you can always drag the corresponding Metamagic rod variant to the hotbar if you prefer. To actually use it, and this has to be done before casting a spell, simply click on the Metamagic rod you want to apply next. By doing so, you'll notice it will become outlined, which means it's working. Also, do note that when you first equip a Metamagic rod, it will automatically be outlined, so ready for use. Now we have to actually cast the spell. We have a greater Quicken rod here, which means our bolstered Storm of Justice will be cast as a swift action so instantly. Let's give it a go. We've already initiated battle, so all we have to do is, with the rod outlined, cast the spell. And there we go, the enemies were already hit with it. Whatever rod you used will remain outlined until you change it, which means the next spell we cast will also be quickened. If you don't want to waste spells with the rod, when for example buffing, remember to deselect, for example, Quicken rods, right? Because we don't want to waste it unless we are in battle. Now, switching between rods even during battle doesn't really cost anything, so you can always do it whenever you want, depending on what spell and what effect you want boosted. You might have noticed our greater Quicken rod went from 3 uses right here to 2. Usually, almost all of the Metamagic rods have 3 charges per rest. Some unique ones like Devouring Lust have, for example, 6. They'll always say the amount of charge they have on the item description. Once again, 99% of the rods will fully recharge upon resting, which makes them an amazing tool for any spellcaster. Now, each individual rod also has its own charges. For example, I have more than one Greater Quicken Metamagic rod here. If I go for another one here, the new one has 3 charges while the old one has 2 only because we just used it, right? Anyways, whenever you rest, everything will be fully recharged. I can actually only think of a single Metamagic rod that doesn't recharge, which is the Rod of Magical Affinity from the latest DLC. Well, not the latest anymore, but the Treasure of the Midnight Isles. As it says, when all charges are expended, the rod becomes useless. However, if you have a Trickster with the Use Magic Device trick, it will become infinite uses, which is really fun. Tricksters are OP as always. Now that we already know how to actually apply Metamagic, let's talk about what each of the Metamagic feats do. Well, the best ones at the very least. And I want to first start with Heighten spell because it's by far the most useful, most versatile of them all that any spellcaster will want. Damage, crowd control, buff, it works for everything. Heighten essentially lets you turn the spell you want into any other spell level above its original up to the maximum you can cast. This has 2 main benefits. First, each increase in spell level will also increase the spell's difficulty class by +1. For example, Hideous Laughter at level 2 has 58 DC. When we turn it into a level 9 spell, we now have 65. It doesn't need any saying, the higher the spell DC, the easier it is to apply the effect to enemies, especially on harder difficulties. It's also important to note that Heighten is the only Metamagic feat that when used to increase the level of your spells will also increase the DC. For example, my normal Storm of Justice has 50 DC. The bolstered version, which is 1 level higher, also has 50, so no DC increase. This is the same for all of the Metamagic that increases the spell level without being Heighten. So that's yet another benefit of Heighten you can't get anywhere else. Second, because of how flexible Heighten is, as you can slot a spell into pretty much any other spell level, whenever you do so, it will increase the number of casts you have of that spell. Let's use Hideous Laughter as an example again. We have 14 casts of it as a level 2 spell. However, if I turn it into a level 3 spell, well, I'll also get to cast it as a level 3 spell, which means more casts of it for 15 extra now, as it will count from our level 3 spell slots instead. Suffice to say, you can use this to get way more casts of the best spells in the game, because essentially, While it is true that we have a lot of spell levels with many spells, some spells are simply better than others. And amusingly enough, low-level spells can be better than high-level spells. Once again, Hideous Laughter when combined with the Best Joke's Mythic ability, despite being a level 2 enchantment spell, is actually better than all of the other enchantment spells in the game, until level 9 with Overwhelming Presence. So, you really want Metamagic versions of it into the other spell slots, instead of the actual spells of that level. Which is why my character here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stacks of Hideous Laughter for something like 90 casts per rest, each with higher DC than the other because of Heighten, of course. Last but not least, Heighten is the only Metamagic feat that will work on all spell types. It doesn't matter if it's damage, like with Chain Lightning here, crowd control with Hideous Laughter, even healing spells, buffing spells too. Once again, some spells are so good, including buffs, that you might consider having them on more spell levels just for extra casts. Lastly, Heighten is actually the only Metamagic feat that is not covered by Metamagic RODS, so if there's a Metamagic feat you want to get during level up, Heighten is the way to go. Now let us cover my second favorite Metamagic feat, Bolster spell. This is for damage blaster casters only, as it can only be applied to damage spells. First, its main advantage is how cheap it is just a +1 level increase. Empower and Maximize, which are the other main sources of extra damage, are way higher than that. This does matter because, well, for a lot of the game your character won't have access to the ultimate spell slots. So for example, being able to turn even something as simple as Burning Hands into a level 2 bolstered version of it can already help early game. The same for Scorching Ray as a level 3 spell. Now, Bolster spell actually makes your spells deal 2 extra points of damage per dice rolled to all targets. Additionally, all enemies in 5 feet of the spell target will be dealt 2 damage per dice rolled of the original spell. The only true downside is that it will prevent you from getting sneak attack damage, which honestly doesn't matter that much for most characters. Now, because of how high enemies' hit point score can get at the late and the upper parts of the mid-game, every boost to spell damage matters, so you can get started into easily destroying enemies. The main reason I would recommend you get Bolster spell as a damage caster is because while it is true you can get it from certain Metamagic rods, remember you can only apply 1 Metamagic rod per spell cast. If you can innately bolster a spell yourself, you can then leave both Empower and Maximize for the ultimate spell damage combo through items like the Plague of Madness Quarterstaff, or the Grandmaster's Rod, or just Empower or Maximize through, let's say, the Devouring Lust or another rod. Trust me, the more spell damage you get, the better and the more fun your life as a blaster caster will be. With Bolster out of the way, let's now cover Empower and Maximize, the 2 remaining damage boosting Metamagic feats. Empower will essentially increase your spell damage by 1.5 times. All the numeric effects will be increased by half. Empower costs double that of Bolster, that is a +2 to the spell level. For example, Storm of Justice, a level 8 spell, would actually require a level 10 spell slot, something only Liches and Angel can acquire. As far as Maximize, it costs triple that of Bolster for a +3, or a +1 increase over Empowered, and the main benefit is your spell damage will be maximized. That is, whenever you roll for damage, well, the weakest version of Bolt of Justice, for example, rolls 1d6 per caster level. When maximized, every single roll would become a 6, so if we rolled 10 times, 60. After all, it's the maximum dice value. The good thing is you can combine both Empower and Maximize and even Bolster 2 at the same time for the ultimate spell damage. Now, Empower and Maximize are way better left to Metamagic rods. For example, through the Grandmaster's Rod, you can have both at once. Most importantly, the best staff for damage in the game, the Plague of Madness. This is once again part of the reason why I prefer to leave Bolster as the actual feat you buy during level up. This way you combine everything at once. Especially because of how super expensive applying both Empower and Maximize are to your spells unless you use them from rods. It would be, for example, a +5 level increase just to have buffing power and maximize. It's too much. With the damage boosts out of the way, now it's time to go into other handy metamagic. First, with Quicken spell. Quicken is actually the costliest metamagic of them all for a massive +4 level increase. The benefit is quite good too. First, Quicken spells won't provoke attacks of opportunity, doesn't really matter much unless you're casting right at the enemy's face. But most importantly, Quicken spells will be cast instantly as swift actions, and you can then combine them with another spell at the same round, which will be a standard action. Note that swift actions are limited to just once per round, so you can't use 2 Quicken spells at the same round. Now, because of how extremely expensive Quicken spell is, +4, it's just too much. Ideally, you really want to leave this to Metamagic RODS, and there's plenty you can find in the game for all spell levels, including even level 7, 8, and 9 through greater Quicken rods. You can even get multiple greater Quicken too. Don't forget, Quicken is not just about damage, it's especially useful with healing spells too, so you can use them in the nick of time to save your party from impending danger. It can even work for revive spells too, which by default have a full round casting action. Extend spell can be another useful metamagic feat. The main benefit is doubling the duration of your spells, even better for buffs. It can also work for spells that have a duration, but aren't really buffing, like let's say Grease, which lasts 1 minute per level by default. It's also just a +1 level increase, the same as Bolster. The best part, of course, is to double the duration of the very useful 1 round level buffs, like Haste. But there's a lot of other ones, such as Greater Invisibility, Displacement, and so on. I already have a best spells guide you can check for that. Being able to double the duration of your 1 round level spells is also part of what makes the Greater Enduring Spells mythic ability so good, as this will only turn spells into 24 hours duration if they last at the very least 5 minutes. So long as your character can achieve 25 caster level with the buff you want for 2.5 minutes duration, when you double it through the Extend metamagic feat, it will become 5 minutes, thus proccing Greater Enduring for 24 hours duration. It can be a bit hard to get such high caster level. Usually the merged mythics, so Angel or Lich, have the easiest, because their caster level will be increased, equal to their mythic rank, so up to +10. The thing with the Extend metamagic feat is that there's an abundance of Extend metamagic RODS in the game. Especially the lesser Extend ones for level 1 to level 3 spells, amazing for haste and other low level buffs. You can get them even very early too, so I wouldn't really bother with the true metamagic feat, just leave it to RODS like almost everything else, besides Heighten and Bolster. On the other hand, as far as I'm aware, you can't get greater Extend metamagic RODS, that is, for level 7, 8 and 9 spells. So if you plan on extending some of these, for example, Angel has some great picks like Sunform and Avenger's Blessing early before you get Army of Heaven, well, you might then consider getting the Extend spell feat, just so that these spells I mentioned can become 24 hours duration. Alright, we only have 2 remaining metamagic feats to cover now. Let's first go with Persistent Spell. This can only be applied to spells that actually allow a saving throw to resist the effect, either for damage or crowd control. The spell level increase is +2, just like Empower, and the main benefit is whenever you cast the spell on the enemy, if they first succeed on their saving throw, they'll have to roll again. If they fail this second saving throw, they'll be fully hit by the spell's effect. My issue with Persistent Spell is, well, the level increase is kinda annoying, and honestly, I just think if you wanted that, you could simply go the AZATA path for the favorable magic superpower, which does the same. Well, it does actually more, except it's freely applied to all of your spells, right? Because it's a permanent passive. Still, if you aren't playing an AZATA, it's something you can consider for your crowd control casters. Demons also have a similar effect, but it's only at Mythic 9, so kinda late in comparison. Now for the last metamagic feat we have Selective Spell. With this, your spell will not have friendly fire anymore, which is quite the handy effect to have, right? It's also very cheap, just a +1 increase like Bolster. Good choices are, of course, Grease, especially early game, when your character still won't have access to freedom of movement to become immune to it. There's also Sirocco at level 6, and any other damage or debuffing spell that has friendly fire you want. Now my main issue with Selective's spell is I think it's kind of a waste past the early game. Well, first, if you're playing on turn-based, the game will completely freeze during your turn, which means you can easily target enemies only with your spells. And as far as real-time with pause, you can just have the enemies engage your tanks first, they won't really move past them, and then simply cast your spell so that it hits the enemies only. You can aim them just fine, especially with the free aim ability. Well, alright friends, so this was it for my Metamagic guide. If you found it useful, as always, please remember to like, subscribe, and even consider becoming a channel member if you want to request some videos of your own. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.